Hi, everybody. We're going to get started with our second to last group critique. So we've got one more group critique, and let's see, it will be held, what's the day? On Friday, since our deadline for the next installment is Thursday. And then Sunday is when our class closes. So that's when you want to have your final submission in is then. Hold on just a second here. So where were we here? No, here we are. Okay. Okay, so we're moving on with our character, and at this phase, what you're doing, you've got the background, you've got the text, and your character design, and we're adding maybe some adjustment layers here. I think the assignment asks for a minimum of two. And then, any kind of corrections. So I would say maybe you have some corrections to make, maybe you don't. Maybe you need to add some adjustment layers, maybe you don't. Most folks probably will. But it really all really depends upon the character design and where it is at this point. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to really, in a way, we're kind of into starting to get into the home stretch with a character. We're going to see if there's anything we can do with the character design, with the way it interacts with the space, and the color. This is where the group critique, where I like to talk a little bit about color. I've talked a little bit about that before, but it is something that now that we're adding all of our adjustment layers, we're going to talk maybe a little bit more about it. Anybody who needs maybe some color work. And essentially what we're going to try to do is just bring in more of a sense of a color harmony. But we'll talk more about that as we go through. So Madison, I actually think you have a pretty good color harmony here. You've got the warm colors like oranges, yellows, and reds, and then you've got a cool green background. So I think it goes pretty well together. Hold on, let me just see if you said anything here. Added a grass field and a cutting board. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, so I actually think this is really coming along nicely. Um, I think at this point it's like getting pretty close to being done, which is good. It's where you want to be. I would say maybe a few. So let's work on just maybe a few things here. The first thing is I really do like this text a lot, and I love what you did here with the clipping mask. One thing I'm noticing though is that the text is a little hard to read. Um, and the reason maybe, so sometimes what you can do is just take off your background and see it against a clean background. And when we look at it, we look, hey, it is a lot easier to read without that background. So that means maybe we need to do something with the background. Um, I would probably say, I mentioned this last week, or I think I did this last week um, in the group critique, but one of the simplest ways to work with a photograph that has a lot of detail is just to eliminate some of it by blurring it. Keeping some of it for the context and blurring it kind of gets the best of both worlds. So I just created a copy here just because, I just wanted to save that layer intact. And I'm just doing it like the most sort of, there's other ways to do it, but I did it sort of the simplest way. And in case I want to change my mind, and I'm going to use, let's see, fields. Oh, let's try the field blur first and see. Okay, so we can just kind of blur here. We can kind of blur it. Uh, you see how much more the text shows up, which is really great. You can actually go pretty far here. It really just depends upon I'm all for really a lot of blur. But then we do want to have some of the grass showing where the character is standing, because that would normally be where we would see things in focus. So what we can do here is we can take and we can put these pins in, and then we can actually adjust it here. You can do it here, or you can actually do it here, where I'm going to turn this into, make it, right in focus. I don't know, you can put really anywhere you want to in here. And what it will do is, um, kind of blur out. It's actually maybe, might actually just kind of maybe a little bit less. I'm gonna just play with this. And oops. Anyhow, so that's what I would do there, because what'll happen here is that let's just say okay here. And you could put in I feel like there's maybe a bit of too much of a transition here with the blur. So what you could do is you could put in more pins there and kind of like kind of soften, you know, how much you like kind of go, do you know what I mean? Like, because you can go halfway there, you can kind of create these better transitions than what I first created. And then let's just, okay, you can see now that that really helps the text, doesn't it? And it also helps your character too. It's like a two-in-one. Okay, so I think that's the main thing. That was the main, I think the main issue. Um, you could, if you wanted to, play a little bit with the movement of your character. I always think that's really good to do. It just really can, because you know, when the character is just sort of standing, um, it doesn't have a lot of like it's not, it doesn't, it's just, you know, when we stand, we're very kind of still and quiet, which is fine. But when you have a group of objects that you're trying to make appear as a living creature, adding movement can, interestingly enough, be the thing that can sometimes really make it come to life. Let's see, hold on a second here. Let's try this again. So I just hit the T, like Control and T on the keyboard. Just to show you, there's so many ways you can create movement. You could use the puppet warp, but I'm just doing, you know, the puppet warp, remember back where we tilted the guy's head, and you can do all kinds of movement. You know, you can change the, like, kind of the way the leg bends, like you could even like bend it this way so that it has like its knee comes down. You know, you don't necessarily have to do that, but you can see how, you know, just doing something simple like that and can really make a difference, you know, with the head. Is this the head here? You know, even something like tilting it a little bit, you know, you can kind of just have fun. You can sort of think about how would a person move if they're walking, like they kind of move, their whole body sort of goes in different directions, you know, according to just the movement. So you can, yeah, again, you can play with that. And yeah, I think that, so that's the main thing that I would really work on here. You could add, oh, so one thing I wanted to just mention here, you have a adjustment layer here that's actually, so I just wanted to use your project to demonstrate this, because I also, I noticed that people in their exercise this week, the textbook exercise, that people were not clipping their adjustment layer. So if I said, hey, you need to clip your adjustment layer, this is what I'm going to demonstrate right now. What happens with your adjustment layer? This is very subtle, because there's not, it's not so critical in what I'm doing here, because your adjustment layer doesn't have a lot of adjustment in it, like it's doing a very subtle adjustment. But what it is adjusting is everything down below everything. That's what that adjustment layer is doing. Sometimes you actually do want to adjust multiple layers at once, depending. But it's always better to kind of control them individually. So there's two ways to adjust a layer, to clip it, I should say. One is you can just click on it and open it again, and then click this little button here. Let's close it. And then there, can you see that? Now it has the little arrow. The other thing you can do is you can hover between hover between the layers. This is kind of the fast shortcut. And then using either the Alt or Option key on your keyboard. See, it's happening, and now I'm going to click it, and then it's happening. So you can kind of see here, probably I can notice just a very subtle difference. It's hard to see, but it is actually lightening certain things up. So that is what you want to do here with your adjustment layers, to make sure that you always clip it so you really can control it. I think the last thing is maybe, you know, this cutting board. I noticed with the cutting board, I like this cutting board. I think it looks really good, but it's sort of a little bit different than the other colors in your character. You know, it's the one thing, well, you could sort of say the chicken legs are kind of more in the organic colors, but they're a little bit orangier, you know, like kind of brown, like orangey colors, and this is brown. It's the only brown thing, and I wonder if maybe we should we maybe see if we can change it to a different color that might match? Maybe give it a greenish tint or a reddish tint or an orange tint or maybe like something more like that. Yeah, we could do that. So that's always a fun experiment to kind of change things a little bit. So we can click here. There's so many different, so in the adjustment layers, in terms of changing colors, there's quite a few different areas you can play with, all the way from hue and saturation, color balance, selective color. These are good ones. Even vibrance, you can go in here, but let's just, hue and saturation as often is a good one to go to. Let's just clip this before we do anything. You can actually just go in here and kind of like play around with the color. You know, you can see I'm kind of, it's like even now, like maybe, I don't know, I'm losing a little bit of the dimension with it, but you can see by dimension it's starting to look a little flatter, but you can see how it's very easy to just change the overall color. So you can kind of play with that and see, I don't, you know, I'm kind of like looking for something that's still quite subtle. Maybe we could desaturate it a little bit too. We could try that. I don't know. See, now it's looking more black and white. I'm not really getting anywhere too far closer to what I want, but well, let's maybe make it a little greener and see how that looks. I'm not sure about how great that looks now, but maybe that gives you some, you know this project a lot better than I do, so maybe you could play with it a little more and see. Let's turn it off. Go back. Yeah, I think I actually like it better that way now, but you could play with it. Um, and okay, I think that's it. And the other thing too, you know, maybe you don't need the cutting board. I was thinking of that too. You know, do you need it? You could think about it. I kind of think it looks okay without it. Um, well, I'll let you decide that, but I think the cutting board is definitely a nice idea. Um, but again, maybe you don't need it. Okay. Is there anything else? You know, the other thing, so it's always this way, the longer you look at something. The other thing too, I might suggest is playing with an adjustment layer in the background to maybe kind of minimize it a little bit. Like it's very bright right now. It's a lovely green, but I wonder if we could, I'm desaturating it a little bit. Maybe that was too much. Desaturating just kind of pulls the color out. It makes it look a little bit more muted. So I feel like maybe almost like I want to either make it maybe a little more muted or maybe a tiny bit darker, just so that it's not so bright. Because what happens when things are so bright in the background is they can take over your character. Do you know what I mean? It's like it wants to grab your attention. So maybe even something like as simple as that could work. Okay. Anyhow, I hope that gives you something to think about, and yeah, just keep going. I think you're going in a good direction here. Okay, Muriel, hold on a second here. Okay, so I really like what you have done here. I think last week, the week before, with your background and the colors and the text, I think it looks really great. I just love the sort of the black and red and you know, the kind of just the whole atmosphere that you've created, the choice of text. I think it looks really good. So I would just say, you know, you're really probably just one step away from, I think, this being done. And I think it's just in the background and the character, um, mainly, you know, where I love the background photograph, but unfortunately, I think it's really getting in the way of us seeing how amazing your character is. You see, all of that work you put in, we're missing that a little bit or quite a lot. So I would say just kind of you may just have to sacrifice some of this building in here. Okay, so I would move the text up to give yourself more space because your character should be a little bit bigger. So just kind of move it up here. You know, you can still give it some breathing room, of course, but just move it up a little bit so that it's, you know, and then build your, just bring your character, fill that space up with it. And then whatever happens, wherever your background ends up being, you know, if you maybe move it around a little bit or whatever happens to it, blur out anything, you know, this whole area back here. It's We'll still be able, you know, you can keep this in focus, like the roof line and the ground, but this area in here, which is right behind all of the delicate details of your character, you really do want to have, you know, just sacrifice it and get rid of it. And, you know, just the way to do that is just that, you know, blur technique, that selective blur, so you don't have to blur the whole thing. You can just kind of blur. I'm going to sort of blur this center out quite a lot, and then come back in here and bring back, you know, all of these areas in here, down here, you know, underneath our character, where it makes sense, you know. So now you can see now, even just, we could even do it a little bit more, get rid of some more of this here, but you can really see how it has, you know, really made our character stand out. That's it. I think that's the only thing that really is needed at this point. All right. And again, there's other ways to solve this. You know, what I mean by solve is like to bring your character to the foreground. Like you could have a different background, or maybe there's something else you could do with the background. I'm just kind of going with like for me, the most obvious solution, but it's not always necessarily the only solution or the best solution. Everybody, you know, puts together these fantastic PSD files with so many different creative elements and a lot of work to build it. And I get to come in and just kind of make a couple of moves to kind of maybe fix a problem that you might not have seen when you're working on it, because we work so closely on our projects. So I have the easy job of being able to do that, but I always tend to just sort of do it with my own bag of tricks, which, you know, again, is not necessarily the same way you would do it. So this isn't, you know, if this doesn't appeal to you, you know, find another solution. But the main thing is just to make sure that your character is really going to be standing out, because that's what you put all the work in terms of montaging it. And when you show somebody this project, you want to be able to say, yeah, I built this from all of these different elements. And so people can, you know, layer mask, adjustment layers, so people can ooh and ah about that. Okay. All right, we'll just keep going. All right, yes, some patching. That's really a great idea. So, yeah, I really like the colors of this. I really like the new background with the kind of greens, and you sort of got a lot of green and sort of reddy purples, which I think is really a nice color harmony. It's very dramatic and kind of, you know, rich. Um, I would just basically say sort of the main thing, which I think I may have mentioned before, is I just think there's too much space around your character, that your character's getting a little lost. But luckily that's so easy to fix, you know. Like I would just take, you know, take your text, which I think is very, very nice text. I like that kind of curving quality to it. Let's see here. So, you know, just take your text, and I think it's right here. Just, you know, make it a little smaller so it's going to go above your character. Maybe you could tweak it a little bit more, but just, you know, so it's right here in that space. And then just crop it, you know, just turn it into, instead of a long panoramic space, just kind of tuck it around the character. Could even go a little further, but that's automatically going to make your character, so now we can see your character more, which is really what we want to do. And otherwise, I might, you know, selectively blur the background a little bit, you know, maybe right behind your character. you know, like just like we did before with the field blur, so that behind your character maybe it's blurred and up and below it's not, so we get a sense of the detail of the rock, but we don't see it like right behind the character. Your colors, you know, you've got greens and sort of purples and reds. I kind of think that I would, you know, if I were playing with this, what I might want to do is play with the eyes. Um, and see, maybe the eyes could be turned into maybe like purple, you know, sort of maybe more purpley color to kind of bring it into this harmony. Is there any other colors? I kind of feel like maybe that's, or you know, green or this teal green, but maybe the purple would be the obvious choice because it would still stand out. And that's always something really fun to do in your adjustment layers, because you can just grab your oops, that's not what I wanted to do here. Grab your uh there we go, adjustment layer, and you know, go to hue and saturation and clip it and just kind of experiment with it, you know. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do here. Oh, it's amazing what you can do. Just kind of maybe turn it a little bit more red. You could try that. You could maybe desaturate it or saturate it or more, whatever you wanted to do. Um, you know, just things like that can be very, just really make a difference, and it's non-destructive too. Like maybe make it a little darker, but you can sort of see that it's like starting to blend in with this color here. Um, I don't know what you were thinking about the shadow, whether you thought the shadow was a good idea or not. I don't know. What do you think? Like putting a shadow behind it? In some ways, it might be a little hard because the rocks are a little bit, you know, they're not a flat surface, so maybe it'd be better not to have that, or maybe just a little bit. I don't know. I think that's something that you could decide to do or not. Um, the text, you know, I almost think that maybe the text could have a little bit more pizzazz, maybe. You might experiment with that, like what you could do with your text. Um, is there, you know, just to kind of bring it out a little bit more. Maybe you could try some different effects in here, like a shadow or maybe a stroke around it. What would that look like? I don't know. I'm not sure about that color, but you know, you could play with, you know, you could play with different things. Maybe that purple color that you have here, you can kind of sample that. That's maybe a little too dark. Um, well, you know, you get the idea. Like you could sort of maybe experiment with, you know, whatever appeals to you. I'm just grabbing the stroke, but something that brings it to life just a little bit more. I don't know if that's quite enough, but you could maybe experiment. Yeah, so just kind of keep experimenting with your design. Um, it's really interesting, I think, in terms of when we get to a certain point in a design, and this is true for, I think, everybody, where you put in a lot of work and you've really seen the results, a lot of payoff, you really feel like your design has come a long way. Um, you know, and you think, hey, it looks, you know, it looks really good. I have this experience a lot of the times where I think it's really good, and then sometimes I don't want to work on it anymore because I feel like, well, you know, I'm really feel complete, you know, it feels complete. And sometimes it is. Sometimes when you work a little bit more on something and experiment, you can actually take it to a whole nother level. Like your sort of design skills and the design itself can kind of really evolve um, in a kind of really magical way. So you could try, you know, kind of play with it a little bit more. Maybe like I think you could have maybe a little more movement. Maybe you could try maybe somehow, maybe some puppet warping, or um, you know, moving your character around. Maybe she's gonna, you know, maybe she's fluttering a little bit more, you know, like in the space, or I'm just kind of, maybe her wings could be a little bit bigger, almost like her wings could go like, you know, like really could maybe stretch out. I don't know, kind of become like bigger and more sort of amazingly magical. So, you know, the hair maybe could sort of move a little bit more. So you could kind of experiment. Like the Puppet Warp is really amazing for that, but you don't even necessarily need Puppet Warp. The amazing thing too about working digitally is that you can, of course, all of these, you can go to your history panel and undo everything here that I've done, go right back to the beginning, and you can do that yourself. But you can also save additional PSD files, like, and rename them. Like, so you've got, your name here, and so you could go version 1, version 2, version 3. So you can actually just in an hour or two just race through like 4 or 5 different versions and save the original version and all of the versions that you've created. It's digital, so you can do as many as you want. I really like doing that because that way, I have like I can just really make a lot of uh, you know really creative choices, you know, that aren't necessarily permanent. You can change them all and undo them and go back to your original, and no harm. Okay, all right, you're also going in a really good direction here, so these are just some possible suggestions to kind of keep experimenting with. Yeah, keep going. So yeah, I love the idea of matching the colors, and I think your text really does actually really match what's happening in your character, which is fabulous. And I love the running. It's wonderful. Nice. Okay, so uh, I think the main thing at this point I would work on a little bit more is the background. I still think, let's just go to this background right here. Um, an earlier background, just because I'd love to be, again, it happens so often where we're working and we do see all the work we've done, we can separate it all out, but somebody else looking at it still has a problem with seeing it because we're not used to it, and we won't be used to it because we didn't build it. So it's really important that you come up with the background that is going to really highlight it. And this one definitely does a better job of that. If I were to say what the two choices, I would definitely go with this one. But I don't think it's really quite right for your character either, is it? Because I know you want to have something that looks more gardeny. So I'd keep experimenting. Like, let's see. Google Images, looking around, and I sort of Googled garden fog. I also Googled garden mist. Just kind of these are, just kind of it's like I know that I'll get something that's going to be more misty and subdued, backgroundy with those keywords. Not all. I mean, I'm sort of finding a few here and there. I'm not. I haven't even checked the size of these, but you know how to do that. But you can kind of play around like garden rain, or just garden photos and look for um, photographs that are going to. I don't really see. These are all very detailed. So no close up of a fountain. Hmm. So yeah, just kind of play around. Let's go back to garden mist here. So that's a pretty one. And I don't know if that has anything to do with what you're interested in, but um, sort of threw it on a layer and just kind of just to get a reference. Again, not suggesting that this is the one you want to work with or anything, just to show you how it is possible to get a background that gives you the context, in case like the natural wildlife, that kind of quality that you're looking for, um, and yet still have it remain as a background. Now we can see your beautiful shadow and your character, you know. So you might give that a try. And then the text is still a little hard to read, so I might play with that a little bit more. Maybe you can apply a stroke around it, or maybe I don't think I have this text. I'm pretty sure I don't have this text. Let's just see. Oh, maybe I do. Do I? Hmm. So, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Yeah, it's I don't think I have. I was gonna like add it, make it bolder to kind of get it a little stronger, but I don't think that this one really will do that. So, okay, I don't think I actually have that. So you might. So there's a lot of kind of fonts that are kind of very. So you could play with this one. Maybe you could try a stroke. Maybe you could make it bigger or bolder, whatever you can. Uh, I don't think it's your color or your treatment. I think that's pretty good. Like what you've done here. I think that even when we go to the plain background here, it's a little easier to read. It's very delicate. So, what you might want to do here then is actually, whatever you choose in terms of your uh, image, even though this is really pretty, um, oh, I don't think I wanted that. This is really pretty, simple background. I think you still need to get everything you can out of the way from that text. Like I think you really do need to like blur, blur it. Even now, it's still a little hard to read. So, but you get the idea. You might have to experiment with it, and really try to get it legible. Again, there's a lot of other fonts out there that will give you that kind of curvy look, that handwritten font like look that you want, but will be a little easier to read. Like what you're looking for is something with a bolder or a bigger footprint, like kind of a thicker lines. Okay, I think you're almost there. Oh, I love the idea of making this more dramatic. I do think that why not? Really give your character and design a lot of that intensity. Okay, so I really like sort of the silvery quality of your character, like the metal look of it. I think that's really, really nice with your design. Um, and what I would say about your character, couple things now that we're kind of, sort of getting into the refining aspect of it, is I would consider, so, all of these like logos and text and, all this stuff on here, just get rid of it. You can just, now that you know how to like work with all that, just delete all that stuff off of there. Using the correction method we did in the exercise before. Because I just think that that's just, you don't need to have anything branded, even if it's small. It's like not it gets quite small when we zoom out. It's still a distraction, and you just you want this to be your character. Um, Now the handles here of the broom, the way they're attaching to the body, they don't seem like they're quite attaching it. That's something I think you could work on a little bit more. I think so. In looking at it, I kind of feel like what you need is something intermediate, an intermediary, um, like something that will kind of attach to the TV and then kind of attach to the broom handle in some way. That you can fake that, like maybe something round or like a ball or I don't know. You can sort of kind of brainstorm that, but something that you could attach on here um, like a something mechanical or something something piece of hardware that you could just put in there and then tuck this in. So you could maybe tuck it out. Like you've got these tin cans here, almost like that's almost like the same, the same idea of something you could attach there. Like if you think of the ball joint on your arm, like where your arm attaches, I'm sort of thinking like something like that, that somehow you get that transition working. And then of course you don't need to work on this side because it's hidden. It's just this side is the I think the problem. Um, yeah, that's the main thing in terms of your character. I could still see sort of experimenting with it a little bit more, maybe, just in terms of it feels like it's kind of falling. Can you see it's sort of got a line? It's like feels like it's falling a little bit to the left. So maybe is that layer 8 there? You can sort of straighten, like maybe straightening the foot a little bit will bring it back on track. You can kind of experiment with that. Um, Maybe that was too much. Oops. Just kind of playing with it, or maybe it's the TV that needs to be straightened. So you can kind of experiment with that, sort of get it a little bit more like it's balanced. Um, and okay, so your text and your background are the most saturated parts of by saturated, that means the brightest of the colors. And I feel like that's kind of taking the attention away from your character. So I would be inclined to desaturate your background. I like the blue color, the cool color, but maybe desaturate it a little bit more so it's more mellow and muted. And maybe with the text too, maybe instead of bright yellow text, maybe it could be blue or silver, or kind of this sort of yellowy color, like to match it, and so it doesn't overwhelm it. You could try that. You could also kind of maybe with your broom, you know, you could probably liven that up. Like you could sort of think about like intensifying your character in some way. You could go and add an adjustment layer, and see maybe just you could vibrant or saturate it a little bit more just to kind of give it a little, see how that actually starts bringing it forward. Just that little bit that I did brings it forward so it doesn't seem like it's just, fading away. So I would just experiment with that. I think you're, getting pretty close to being done. Um, it's just a matter of, experimenting with a few more things. Um, I also still feel like too, maybe the background too, by muted, I would blur out some of the, areas maybe around here, maybe all you need is a hint of graffiti, right? Like maybe this is enough right here, and then maybe up here and around the character could be blurred out a little bit so that again you keep more attention on your character. Okay? All right, so just keep going and experimenting a little bit more. Anna, well, I really like all the color changes you made here. It looks like you took your adjustment layer here and just kind of took it over all of the layers, and you definitely can do that, where you can take an adjustment layer and apply it, and that sounds like, it looks like what you deliberately wanted to do to kind of get everything purple. I think that looks really good. I think it's actually a very nice look for your character. Um, so let's see. I think just a few things here. This leaf here, for some reason, I think whenever you submitted your assignment, I may have been giving feedback in the gradebook instead, and I wasn't able to fully talk about this. But if you can, it would be great if you could find an actual leaf, like a photograph of a leaf rather than an illustration. Just because everything in our characters is photographic, and having something that's not photographic, although there's nothing wrong with that from a designer point of view, for this character, it's just, I think, better to have your everything made out of photographs. So just find a green leaf on Google Images and just mask it just like you've been doing. I think it'll look really good. The shadow. Yeah, so there's different ways to create shadows. It looks like you've used a drop shadow for all of yours, and that's okay because it looks like you've got sort of this, if you have like something it's lying on, that might be appropriate. I might lighten it up a little bit. You can go to this drop shadow area in here and, just lighten it. You can lighten all of them to the same amount. Let's see. It feels like it's just, when shadows get too dark, sometimes it can look a little fake. So you might want to just see if you can lighten that up a little all around there. I think that's the main thing. I might try playing with a little bit of movement if you like in your character. It's Garden Glitter Grace. That's the name, so I've just changed that. Garden Glitter Grace. Um, I think this background is okay. Um, it's a little bit too kind of vectory, Photoshoppy Illustrator for this project. I think it's okay if you really love it. But if you can, it would be nice to maybe have a background that is like photographic, like a photograph rather than an illustration. Just because when you when you show this to somebody, you can show them, hey, I masked, I did all this masking, and I worked with photographs. The whole project was created out of photographs. I think that's quite impressive to show somebody your skills in Photoshop. And the background, because it's not in Photoshop, it actually looks like somebody else's artwork. Like that's what it would be, you know, like somebody else who did this amazing thing in illustration, like an illustrator. And I think you just always want to be showing your own stuff as much as possible. Um, and as designers, you know, we do use other people's photographs and manipulate them. It's an accepted practice, but we would typically not be taking a background, like an illustrated drawing, and putting it in our own work. We'd be, you know, making it ourselves if we use one. So why not just get a photograph? Like if you want to have it laying on something, maybe some crumpled paper, even just some white paper, I think could look good with your project. Something very simple, or you know, like you know, florist paper. You could just, you don't have to have florist paper, but you know, flowers are always often wrapped in paper, so you could just put some white paper behind it, you know, crumpled up. And there, I'm sure you could easily find a photograph of that. Okay, so I think you're going in a good direction. Just you know, a few suggestions to keep you, you know, tweaking your project a little bit more. Okay, so you change the pumpkin stem to brown. Yeah, yeah, why not? Yeah, okay, so let me just this. There we go. Okay, so I love the text. I like the text since you created it. I think it's just a very nice kind of curve. I like the text you've chosen for it. It's nice, easy to read, a lot of substance, and I like the color. Um, you know, I really always love this kind of pale, icy blue. One thing though I think would be good is if, so you want to kind of really be very deliberate about the color choices you make at this point. You know, when you start out with all of the different photographs, it doesn't really matter because in Photoshop, you can change color. So I would, you know, think about colors, how you want to work with the colors. So right now you've got this sort of kind of brown color, you've got a bright orange, you've got green, you've got red, you've got blue. I'm going to ignore the background for now. And then this sort of like paler kind of beige, which actually kind of goes with the cinnamon stick, doesn't it? So I would kind of maybe think about how can you bring this more deliberately together. And you know, keep in mind, and this is a sort of a general comment, that pumpkins don't have to be orange. They can if you want them to be, but everything can be changed in Photoshop pretty much, you know, if you have a good photograph. So, you know, kind of play around with it. Like, so you've got red here. I do like the red here, but nothing else really is red in your design except for the feet. So what if you changed those and made those, for example, if you made those orange, you know, that would be pretty easy to do. Or, well, brown, orange, kind of, or blue. So you could make them this blue color and then suddenly that blue would be tied in. You know, it's all about, if you remember back to, if you've covered Unity in any of your classes, if you took design principles, color theory, we're always talking about Unity. If you haven't taken those classes yet, Unity is pretty easy. It just means you want to match things. And color is pretty much the most powerful way to create Unity. It's a very powerful kind of unifier. Um, and so you could just kind of start thinking about, okay, maybe make this an orange. Oh, I think I passed the orange. Did I? There. So that's more orange. So you can see, you can sort of like maybe saturate it more so it match your pumpkins. That's just one possibility again, you know? So it's just kind of about trying to sort of get things to belong together. It's okay. The other thing I would do is kind of keep working with movement. You know, like the feet feel like they don't quite, I mean, they sort of look like feet, but could we maybe uh, do something to make them look more feet-like? You know, like maybe one foot would be coming out this way, for example, you know? So right now that already starts looking maybe a bit more like feet, you know? So, you know, do the arms need to just be sort of at the sides, or can they maybe do something, you know? Maybe they're pointing or jumping or dancing. Maybe they could be a little bit bigger, you know? They feel like maybe they're not quite big enough. Maybe. Oops, now they're too big. Oh, well, that's a little too big. but you're going to get the idea. You kind of can start, um, you know, just taking it and starting to make your character more, just bring it to life just a tiny bit more through movement, through playing with the different parts. Let's make it a little smaller. Maybe that's still too big, but you kind of get the idea. Maybe you could add some puppet warp if you want, if you need that, but you know, sort of just experimenting. Um, I don't know, the burlap sack could be something that I look at. Maybe it's a little too light for everything else. You know what I mean? Like, you know, when we looked at the previous exercise with the textbook, what we were trying to do is get everything to appear like it belonged together. That's something you kind of can think about with all of your different objects that make your character. Like this one is the one that's sort of most it's sort of faint and feels a little bit like maybe it could be have a little bit more substance to it. So you could try the exposure. I'm trying to think, maybe the exposure could make it a little darker. You could sort of, yeah, you could take it maybe just a little darker. Sometimes exposure can turn things a little bit darker in a more natural way. So now we can turn this on and off. You can sort of see maybe that kind of makes it feel more like part of the design. Maybe then you could add another adjustment layer, because um, you can add really multiple adjustment layers. Like let's say you want to do something with maybe the hue. So instead of like brown, maybe it could have a slightly different color. Maybe it could be kind of greenish. Kind of desaturate it a little bit, you know? So maybe it sort of starts matching the legs. You can see that it's just a matter of like, I'm just kind of pushing it in different directions, but there's so many different directions you could go in to start kind of working with it. I don't know if I like that green. I think I just like the brown better. But again, it's just a matter of experimenting, playing with it, kind of seeing where you can take your character, um, how you can start, you know, bringing all the colors together, you know. Your background, I think then, you know, the idea of the path is very nice. You've got a lot of different kind of choices you've gone through here. Interesting. Let me just see all these different choices. Oh yeah, it's sort of the path idea. That's a kind of a nice one. So I like this one quite a lot because um, it it's sort of blurry in the background and got, you know, because that sky, it's a little simpler, so this could be a good one. Um, I like that kind of rustic quality with the wood. So again, you know, just sort of kind of, I think you want to experiment a little bit more with your background. I can almost see again, you know, this the same background that I used previously. Uh, just throw this in here. Could work, you know, it's like that same sort of blurry. It actually matches the color in your text so beautifully. Let's just look here. It's got those same sort of bluey colors. I don't know, I'm just sort of putting it, I'm not really, but it's sort of got those sort of bluey kind of gray colors. We're losing it a tiny bit here, but you know, so you can see, and it really makes everything pop. So you can see it's just kind of I would keep experimenting just a little bit more with your background, with your character, with the movement. You've got all of the different parts in place. It's just a matter, I think, of just continuing to play and experiment. Yeah, I love the blurred background. I think that really works. It really starts making your character pop out. And I would say with yours, I might just kind of keep playing a little bit more with the color, some of the colors. I think the yellow and green looks really good. You don't have to add any more actual base colors. I think that's all working. But maybe you could make your bananas a little bit more saturated, make them pop a little bit more. You know, by saturated, just, you know, add an adjustment layer maybe um, to your, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. you know, to your bananas, and maybe just, you know, you could even saturate the sea just a little bit, kind of make them a little more vibrant. You know, you've got these vibrant eyes and you've got a pretty vibrant background, even though it's blurred, which is good. It's still very strong. So you want your character to really, and how can we make things stand out in design? We make them brighter, more saturated, more, you know, more intense, or lighter, sometimes making darker, but, you know, giving them more contrast. So you could give that a try with your bananas, maybe just pop them up a little bit. Um, and you know, this edge here still, I still keep coming back to this edge. I know I've talked about it before. Um, and yeah, it's just that kind of selection down there. You could try, I'm going to click right here. I know, I think you've tried other things, but what you could try here is maybe click on that layer mask there. You could try maybe taking the smudge tool. You could try that. I don't usually do that, but at a very low strength, this is 18, maybe you could just kind of smooth it a little bit. Give that a try. Hmm. Let's see. You could try that again. I'm going to go back here, go over it again because I made it lumpier. You could sort of try just kind of going along, seeing if you go up and down like I did before, what happens is that you get a sort of a kind of a bump. So is that better? Is that better? It's a little tiny bit. So, you know, that was on the layer mask that I did that. You can always go back here. Maybe add a tiny bit more feathering. Oh, what did I do? Anyhow, so you might give that a try. Just kind of play with that a little bit more. What's happening with this little line up here? Is there a little, I might, if there's something going on, oh yeah, it's an inner shadow. I might take that off. Just, I don't know if you need that little line. I think it's nice when it just kind of goes over that edge, like it kind of just opens out the space. Uh, yeah, that's I think the major things. Maybe with the text, maybe you could um maybe with the text, maybe make it a little brighter. It's the really pretty color. I like it. I think it works well with the design. I'm only concerned because it's maybe a little hard to read. Garden's pretty good. I think it's just glitter and grace that gets a little harder. I don't know. It's a little hard when you have things so when you make, you know, when you have so much distortion with the letters, which adds a lot of character, but it does also uh, I'm not sure how you created that. Was it with the arc tool? Um, Maybe you could lessen that a tiny bit and stretch it out. You know, you could make your character, if you need to, you know, get a little more space, make your character a little bit smaller. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of going, these angles make it harder to read. So you could sort of stretch it out a little bit more, sort of more kind of less of that distortion. Um, okay, I think that's it. I think that's looking really good. I just would experiment a tiny bit more with things um, okay, everybody, I think I've got everybody in this critique. So keep experimenting. You know, as soon as you're ready, just put it into the next task area. I'll try to, you know, pop in earlier if I can this week. Well, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how things go in terms of submissions. But for sure, I'll be doing the critique on Friday.